Namaste, Mitron. Welcome back to Movie Community College. Marinam Tish Hay, the Warrior Queen, with Jeremy, the Professor. Oh, goodness.
15 more times the Simpsons predict the future.
There have been some really weird little incidents.
So, since everybody's on lockdown, I thought we would do something fun. Let's see how many times the Simpsons predicted the future. Are you ready?
Okay, I'm ready. I know one that for sure is going to be in here.
Just 2 years ago, I made this video. Speaking of presidential elections, The Simpsons predicted Trump, as in President Trump.
Yes.
As you know, we've inherited quite a budget crunch from President Trump.
Contains spoilers.
How bad is it, Secretary Van Houten?
We're broke.
Crazy, right? By the way, is Lisa supposed to be Elizabeth Warren? Anyways, guess what? They got more stuff right. It's time for 15 more times The Simpsons predicted the future. First, let's travel back to 2017, when the show predicted how Game of Thrones would wrap up. The Simpsons thrust the family into the medieval kingdom of Springfield.
Wow.
Sure, there's a cameo from Jaime Lannister himself as Marge's twin brother, Martin.
Twin brother?
You get that money to save my mom, or never set foot in this hovel again.
Good things come to those who wait.
And even a three-eyed raven. But what made this especially fascinating, the final sequence of the episode that shows the family watching as a dragon burns down their village. It's a literal spitting image of the penultimate episode of Game of Thrones when Dany flips out and wreaks havoc on King's Landing.
Peter Dinklage.
Now, speaking of three-eyed animals, perhaps the most iconic one was introduced in this 1990 episode.
I remember this.
That's right, this is when Bart and Lisa go fishing, and Bart catches a three-eyed fish.
1, 2, 3.
Of course, Mr. Burns, who's running for office, tries his best to prove that his power plant is not responsible for the genetic mutation that he calls Blinky. We all know the truth, and by the end of the episode, Mr. Burns convinces his critics when he couldn't even swallow his own story.
Believe it, he's blown it for sure.
Ruined before it hit the ground.
Now, Blinky actually became a real thing when a fisherman in Argentina caught a three-eyed wolffish that was similarly located next to a power plant. I'm guessing the power plant's owner didn't even think about running for public office. We all know The Simpsons has predicted a handful of technological breakthroughs over the years, like video calling and smartwatches to name a couple. Well, this is even crazier. Back in Season 3, we found out that Homer's long-lost half-brother Herb, voiced by the great Danny DeVito, created a translation app to make sense of baby talk. Basically, you could tell if a baby was happy, sad, mad, angry, all that stuff.
Lavish attention on me and entertain me.
Maggie, you talk!
Many years later, in 2016, app developers in Taiwan created an app called Infant Cries Translator, claiming that it could translate all those babies' cries. In this episode back in 1990, Marge is not happy.
I remember this as well.
She believes the show is promoting violence to children, and she starts a protest. She demands censorship and successfully gets the show to clean up its act.
Itchy and Scratchy seem to have lost their edge.
Oh, I think it conveys a very nice message of sharing.
I think it sucks.
Over in Italy, we find out that Michelangelo's David will be touring the United States and make a stop in Springfield. Protesters gather in favor of censoring David's private parts, but Marge can't jump on board with them. Life imitated art, literally, when a replica of Michelangelo's David was set to be unveiled in St. Petersburg, Russia. Residents were actually asked to vote on covering up the sculpture after some complaints that it would be a bad influence on children. This episode is packed with predictions of the future, which we've touched on before.
I remember this
Lisa
one too.
stumbles upon a fortune teller that shows what life will be like in 2010. Her future involves a romance with Hugh Parkfield, who brings her to London to meet his parents. Now, this might seem like a stretch, but check out the London skyline. Some claim that this building is the Shard. I believe it. I know what you're thinking. It's just a generic tall building, but for the sake of this video, let's give The Simpsons the benefit of the doubt. This episode aired in '95, but the Shard's construction didn't begin until March of 2009 and opened to the public in February of 2013. The 95-story skyscraper is the tallest building in the UK. Speaking of British icons, this is a fun one about the Beatles that aired in 1991. As it turns out, Marge was a big fan of the group, especially Ringo Starr. In fact, years ago she painted portraits of Starr and she mailed one to him, but unfortunately she never got a response. It wasn't until decades later when Marge picked up her painting hobby yet again that Starr finally replied to her.
Thanks for the fab painting of yours truly. I hung it on me wall. You're quite an artist.
Yep, you guessed it, this happened in real life. Back in 1963, two teenage girls recorded a reel-to-reel tape and sent it to a theater where the Beatles were playing. Some 50 years later, the tape was returned to the women, and finally, Paul McCartney wrote a lovely letter for their kind gesture. Back in this 1992 episode, Homer gets kicked out of an all-you-can-eat restaurant.
I remember this.
For, you guessed it, eating too much. He then goes on to sue the restaurant for false advertising.
I'm gonna fight this thing.
Oh, please don't. For me.
Sorry, Marge. This is my quest.
No shock here, in 2017, a man in Massachusetts was kicked out of the Golden Corral after spending 7 hours at the restaurant and putting
50
down
pounds of food.
pounds of food. After he got kicked out of the restaurant, he sued the place for $2 million.
Oh, dear.
Since we're on the topic of food, let's touch on this episode back in 1999. Homer took up farming and created a hybrid tomato-tobacco plant.
I don't remember that
tobacco was
one.
born thanks to the nuclear materials that Homer picked up from the power plant.
Gross.
Cigarette butts.
Over 20 years later in Japan, as a result of the Fukushima power plant
wow.
meltdown, nearby fruits and veggies took on some mutated forms. Good news, everyone, you don't need to
I
be an
remember
astronaut
this.
to travel to space. That's exactly what happened in this Simpsons episode and in real life. In the show, NASA needed to increase its popularity, so they decided to send an ordinary person into space. Of course, they chose Homer Simpson. In real life, in 2013, a British man won a competition sponsored by, get this, the deodorant brand Lynx. His prize, a flight in space, which normally would have cost around £60,000. You would think the fictional holiday of Whacking Day, in which everyone grabs a stick and whacks snakes to death,
I
would
remember
be
this.
completely ridiculous.
Every May 10th, local residents gather to drive snakes into the center of town and whack them to snake heaven.
It was featured in this
I remember that.
1993 episode of The Simpsons, and thanks to Lisa, Bart, and the bassy voice of Barry White, the snakes were eventually saved.
What am I gonna do?
But that hasn't always been the case in our history. In fact, Whacking Day was inspired by some real-world events. In Florida, pythons were becoming such a big threat in the Everglades ecosystem that they started the Python Challenge in 2013. They actually recruited hunters to lure and kill the invasive reptiles, and the hunter who racked up the most kills received $1,500, while the longest catch took home $1,000.
How did Burmese python
This
end up in Florida?
1994 episode
Probably
in
a
which the
flight.
lunch lady Doris is shown cooking with, quote, assorted horse parts, now with more testicles, actually became a reality nearly 20 years later.
Oh, I remember this.
Oh, more
Gross.
testicles!
In 2013, there was a serious
Gross.
horse
Do you remember this?
Yes,
I remember this too.
beef
IKEA?
products were found to have
Well, that was just one of
undeclared
them.
horse meat in them. We all know that movie studios will go to great lengths in order to get people seated in theaters. Take this one, for instance. This was an actual
Ew,
billboard used
that's
to promote
gross.
Kill Bill Volume 1 in 2003, in which a bloody mess sprayed onto the street in nearby parked cars. Might be a bit overkill if you ask me. The advertising agency was no doubt inspired by this 1992 episode
Ew.
of The Simpsons, in which a
Gross.
billboard for the Itchy and Scratchy movie
Oh.
squirted blood onto the street below.
Wow.
Back in this 1998 episode, Homer's genius business idea hits him at breakfast. Well, while cooking up some breakfast. He enlists Bart to help him with his grease business, buying bacon, frying it up, and selling the grease. Spoilers, it's nowhere near profitable.
First day of school.
Not for you, it isn't. You're in the grease business now.
So they think bigger, as in stealing grease from the deep fryers at Krusty Burger.
Oh.
They're eventually caught, much like these real-life grease-stealing New York thieves. Apparently, yellow grease is a valuable ingredient in biodiesel and is
Gross.
highly coveted amongst thieves posing as legitimately licensed grease haulers. Guitar Hero was an absolute smash hit when it first landed on consoles back in 2005.
Joshua
The
playing that?
series
Yeah, I
spanned
remember.
numerous titles and even some spin-off games. But before it even hit the public
I remember this
consciousness,
one.
the words
Yes,
Guitar
I do
Hero
too.
showed up on an episode of The Simpsons. Back in 2002, Homer lives out his dream at Rock and Roll Fantasy Camp, and it's run by the Rolling Stones. By the end of the episode, the Rolling Stones gift Homer with a jacket, and guess what's printed on the back of it?
And we consider it an honor if you join us.
And finally, over the last 30 years, The Simpsons has correctly predicted a whole bunch of sporting events. That includes some Super Bowl winners, unfortunately not this past Super Bowl, halftime performers, and even Olympic curling. In this 2010 episode, Homer and Marge try out for the U.S. Olympic curling team after discovering their newfound love for curling. They team up with Agnes and Seymour Skinner, and surprisingly, they're so good they qualify for the 2010 Vancouver Winter Olympics. The team faces off against Sweden and wins gold behind Marge's fantastic
That's
flight.
hilarious.
How's this for a date night?
Wonderful, homie.
Take that, Sweden. Tell me how my ice tastes.
8 years later, this actually became a reality. The U.S. men's curling team beat the heavily favored Swedes to win gold in South Korea.
Wow.
What's your favorite prediction that The Simpsons called correctly?
That's
Let us know in the
hilarious.
comments below. I'm predicting that you're going to subscribe to this channel.
Ooh. Wow.
Whoa, that was fun.
That's very funny. Oh, dear.
Well, do you think at least 1,000 people will watch that video?
Maybe. I don't know.
Maybe. But it was fun for
Maybe
me to watch
not.
it.
It was fun, though.
Well, thanks for watching, all 4 of you.
Yes,
and
right.
please like and subscribe if you haven't yet.
And hit the bell.
We'll catch you guys later. Peace and much
Bye.
love. Well, thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe to the channel, and please check out our internet radio station, darkskyradio.com. Again, that's darkskyradio.com. We got great talk shows. We play some music. You will be thoroughly entertained. Peace and much love.